Hello and welcome to Lit Illuminated. I'm so excited that you're here with me today. A reminder that this is a space where we talk about books. I'm pulling books off my shelf or something that I've just read that I want to share with you, and the impact it had on me, but also the way that I'm seeing it being written, the process and the techniques of the author. But it's also a space for us to just talk about books and the way they help us connect to ourselves and connect to the world around us. And in this space that the world is right now, story is so important and really helping us understand each other and to get connected and to also really understand ourselves is so important, I think. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about Jazmina Barrera's On Lighthouses. And previous Lit Illuminated, I talked about her other book, The Queen of Swords, which I really love so much. And the result of that was I went and got her other books to read. And this one really stuck out to me. And it was in a very similar format. So it is memoir mixed in with research. And I love when authors do that and take us on their journey through discovery, through research, and allow us to get the insights that they're getting, but also then experience how they're experiencing the journey. And that's exactly what she does here. She talks at the beginning about collectors and the idea of things that people collect. And for her, it was lighthouses. It's a thing and an obsession that she has. And as someone else who is a collector and someone who gets obsessed about things, I love that connection. And I really thought it was fantastic that she took the time to write a book about that kind of collector notion and then what she discovered along the way. It's just a beautiful connection of story as well as research. And she brings in literature connectors, which I think is also a good way to bring a reader in. These are things that you can kind of connect to and remember, or you might go, oh, I had no idea. So she talks about Sir Walter Scott. She talks about Robert Louis Stevenson. She talks about Virginia Woolf, Edgar Allan Poe. Joyce as well. There's a lot of authors and their stories and the connections that she brings in here. And their connection to lighthouses and or writing about lighthouses. I think one of Poe's last stories was based in a lighthouse that she kind of investigates in this space, which I thought was really interesting. So as always in this space, I usually give you some quotes. And this one I thought really brings in this idea of what it is to be writing about something, researching something, wanting to collect something, wanting to experience something. And then what does that actually mean and how do you go through that space? And so this was on page 43. Experience sometimes falls short of memory, and sometimes it's memory that can't achieve the heights of experience. And in some way, I feel this is what she's moving through in the text, that she's experiencing things. There's memories that she has in this space. There's this idea of wanting to hold on to something, but not quite being able to do so. And it's just a beautiful journey that we have throughout. Towards the end of the book, it shifts from like lighthouse to lighthouse to lighthouse to, and then her like talking about literary stuff as well as talking about where she is in the world. It moves into this diary space, and we have this conversation back and forth between her and the reader of like, is this a diary? I don't really like the idea of diaries. I don't know. I'm uncomfortable with the way to communicate through a diary. Do I treat it like an entity? Am I talking to myself? What does it actually mean? And then she later goes, I feel that this is more like a log. Like I'm not doing it obsessively every day. So it's not really a diary. It's just me logging my experience. And so I love that at the end, she gave us like those day-to-day logs that she was doing at this process of the last lighthouse she was visiting, because it's also how the book was formatted. It's formatted in a way where it's like following a log. She'll start each chapter on where we're going, what lighthouse it is. And we usually get like a little drawing or a picture in there. So like a picture of a lighthouse. And then if you're watching on on YouTube, and like this one's on Jeffrey's Hook, so she gives you all the description about the lighthouse itself, like where it's located, how tall it is, what it looks like. So in some way, it's like this log of, I am going to look at this lighthouse. Here are the details about the lighthouse that you need to know. And now I'm going to share my experience there. And that is the process that she uses throughout. Some other things she connects on is the naming of lighthouses, which I found very fascinating, as well as talking about the masculine, feminine, the phallic kind of notion of a lighthouse, but the naming, and if it's female or male and what that means, and then also this kind of the gaze of the lighthouse. It's a really haunting kind of concept that I never really thought about with lighthouses. And I've been to many lighthouses. I at one point had multiple paintings and pictures of lighthouses in my house. But this idea that I always saw it as something that we were looking towards, right? We were looking to the lighthouse, or at the lighthouse, or up at the lighthouse, and that it was there to guide and to direct people at sea. I never really thought about turning that around. And so when she talked about the lighthouse gaze, I was like, whoa, like it is this gate, like what is the view of the lighthouse? And how it like is looking around, where it is looking, what's its viewpoint, why is it there? This constant gaze out into the sea. And how, anyway, I could go on a little bit about this. The idea about the naming of ships, usually that they're women names, because, you know, there's this superstition that if it has a male name, it will sink. But this idea that you give it a female name to keep it safe. And so if you think about the lighthouse as the male gaze and the ships are the female spaces out there. Anyway, just a totally new way of thinking about lighthouses that I don't think I would have ever got to without reading on Lighthouses by Jazmina Barrera. A brief pause in programming to really offer my sincere thanks for you joining me here on the Lit Illuminated podcast, as well as all your support through likes and subscription and comments. It all matters for podcasts like this one. And I also just wanted to mention that Lit Illuminated is more than this podcast. There are other ways to get connected to literature and the way that it informs our lives. I offer workshops as well as MFA-like seminars. I do independent study as well as mentoring memoir writers. So if you're interested in getting more connected with Lit Illuminated, please check out RebeccaBeardsall.com. And thank you again for listening today. At one point, she talks about her life personally and this possible connection of her obsession with lighthouses. And I'm going to read that one to you as well. So this is on page 87. It's perhaps true that I like lighthouses because I'm disoriented. I always feel as if I'm adrift, which is why the image of the sailor lost on the high seas is so deeply disturbing. And this was a real insightful space for her to talk about this idea of disorientation in her life, feeling adrift, and her connection to lighthouses, and that this could be potentially why she's drawn to the imagery of a lighthouse, the stories of lighthouse. And so when we talk about in this space of Lit Illuminated, what are we drawn to? What are we obsessed about? What do we keep seeing in patterns and things we're reading? For her, I mean, it's the image of the lighthouse, but she is reading a lot about lighthouses and reading about people that are connected to lighthouses. So in that way, this is a pattern. These are things that are being shown to her, and for her to recognize what that is. And that perhaps, I mean, the idea of perhapsing in a memoir is always like, I'm not sure, possibility, maybe I should investigate that, maybe not, is how she starts this chapter. It's perhaps true that I like lighthouses because I'm disoriented. Beautiful. And finally, towards the end, she really kind of gets into this space of the past, present, and what that means. And when you think about a lighthouse and the role that they used to play, and that they're basically not functioning anymore, that we have GPS, we have other mechanisms to help us navigate, that we don't need lighthouses anymore. They're still up, they're still there. Do they function? That we see some that don't function, some that still do function. They become something we go travel to go look at, to go see. It becomes an imagery more than a function. And I think that was an interesting thing that she talks about. So throughout, we're moving through time from when it was built, when the lighthouse was built, what its function was, who lived there, and then to her story. And so she talks about the story of Sir Walter Scott traveling with Robert Louis Stevenson's grandfather, I believe it is, that built lighthouses, was an engineer. And so at some point, she kind of comes back to Scott towards the end here at the last lighthouse. And this is on page 163. A realization. I'm writing about Scott in the present and about my journey in the past. I feel as if what happened to Scott so long ago is more present than what I am experiencing. And for a memoir writer to have that realization in this space where we're talking about self as well as working through research, it often is the case. The research becomes more vibrant, more present than where you are and what you're looking at. I remember for me, when I was writing my one memoir, which started out as my MFA thesis, I was writing about Aotearoa, and at one point in time, I had finished a book and I was out experiencing this place and realized that I was in the place that I had just read about and connected to the author of that space. And it was like that became the most prominent memory for me of the whole journey. Not so much about what I was experiencing, but really that connection to the alive story that I was reading, and then to be in that place and experience that. And I felt that's what Barrera was kind of saying here in this space, that Scott's experience felt more in the present than her own experience of being in the place and writing about it, and that felt like it was in the past. And as always, as I talk about the spiral of time, that they are happening simultaneously. And I love that this brings that in, right? So if you think about the spiral of time and a movement of a spiral, it's the past, present, and future. And if you collapse it down, it's all happening simultaneously. So the fact that Scott's story in this space could be more present and her own experience could be in the past is really that blurring of time that she allows us to get into as the reader, as well as her experience in that space. So I think this combination of blurring time, as well as bringing in the fascination of literature and stories around Lighthouse, as well as her obsession and her collector tendency towards lighthouses, and then also her personal space of going, maybe I'm connected to them because I feel disoriented, I feel adrift. And so going to something that is supposed to stand and give direction and give guidance is something I want to keep going to. So a beautiful way to connect into individual story while also doing research, while also traveling around and investigating and looking at places and what that means and how it translates to a book and into the reader's hands. On Lighthouses by Jazmina Barrera, translated by Christina MacSweeney. It is a beautiful small book that really allows you to dive into that space of a person, an author, investigating something while sharing her journey along the way. Thanks for joining me here today on Illuminated. Wishing you a beautiful day.